For years, AlphaBay was more than just a darknet marketplace. It was a symbol. A place where drugs, weapons, stolen identities, and millions of dollars in cryptocurrency changed hands every single day, hidden behind layers of encryption, anonymity, and digital silence. At its peak, AlphaBay had over 400,000 users, more than 40,000 vendors, and an estimated value of over $1 billion in transactions. Yet everything depended on one person, an administrator who went by a single name, DeSnake. He was invisible, no confirmed photo, no verified real-world identity, only forum posts, system messages, and rules enforced with absolute authority. Then, in July 2017, AlphaBay went dark. No warning, no exit message, no explanation. Users logged in to find nothing but error pages and silence. Millions of dollars in escrow were frozen overnight. Panic spread across darknet forums within hours. At first, many believed it was just another technical issue. Servers fail, mirrors disappear, markets come back. But this time, AlphaBay did not return. Soon after, law enforcement made an announcement. Servers had been seized, the marketplace had been dismantled, and the man believed to be behind it all had been arrested in Thailand. Days later, he was dead, officially ruled a suicide. But almost immediately, questions began to surface. Was DeSnake really the man who died in that prison cell? Was AlphaBay truly run by a single administrator? And if so, how could someone so careful, so powerful, disappear without leaving answers behind? This is the story of AlphaBay, its rise, its collapse, and the administrator who vanished, leaving behind one of the darkest mysteries of the Internet. To understand why AlphaBay mattered, you first need to understand what it actually was. AlphaBay was not a website in the traditional sense. It did not exist on the open Internet. It could not be accessed through Google, links, or search engines. It operated on the Tor network, a system designed to hide the physical location of servers and users by routing traffic through multiple encrypted layers. Within this hidden space, AlphaBay functioned as a marketplace. At first glance, its structure was familiar: listings, categories, vendor profiles, user ratings. But the products were anything but ordinary. Illegal drugs from every continent, stolen credit cards and bank accounts, fake passports, malware, hacking services, and weapons, all paid for using cryptocurrency. Bitcoin was the primary currency, later joined by Monero, a privacy-focused coin that made transactions even harder to trace. AlphaBay was not the first darknet market. Before it came Silk Road. When Silk Road was shut down in 2013, a power vacuum was created. Smaller markets rushed to fill the gap, but most failed, taken down by law enforcement, internal theft, or technical incompetence. AlphaBay learned from their mistakes. It promised stronger security, faster dispute resolution, a professional interface that looked more like an e-commerce platform than an underground bazaar. Vendors were vetted, users relied on escrow systems that temporarily held funds until transactions were completed. Trust was everything, and AlphaBay sold that trust extremely well. By 2016, it had become the largest darknet market in the world. Estimates suggest that AlphaBay processed between 600,000 and 800,000 transactions per year. Daily revenue reached into the millions. For users, AlphaBay represented stability. For vendors, it offered reach and protection. For criminals, it was infrastructure. But for law enforcement, AlphaBay was something else entirely. It was evidence that darknet markets were not collapsing, they were evolving. Each takedown made the next generation more sophisticated. More cautious, more ambitious, AlphaBay was no longer a fringe experiment. It was an international criminal enterprise, operating quietly in the background of the Internet. And at the center of it all was an administrator who believed he had built something untouchable. A system that could not be shut down, a market that could not be traced, and an identity that could not be exposed. That belief would soon be tested. AlphaBay did not become dominant overnight. It emerged quietly, at a time when the darknet was fragmented and unstable. After the fall of Silk Road, users no longer trusted long-term platforms. Markets appeared and vanished in rapid succession. AlphaBay positioned itself as the opposite. From the beginning, it emphasized structure, consistency, and control. The marketplace launched in late 2014, offering features that were still rare in the darknet ecosystem. Multi-language support, advanced vendor profiles, a dispute system designed to reduce fraud and internal conflict. These details mattered. Professional vendors migrated first. They brought reputation, supply chains, and loyal customers with them. As listings increased, so did user activity. More buyers meant more competition. More competition meant better pricing and faster delivery. AlphaBay encouraged this growth deliberately. Forum activity was tightly moderated. Rules were enforced without hesitation. Vendors who violated policies were removed quickly and publicly. This created a sense of order, something most darknet markets lacked. Behind the scenes, AlphaBay expanded its infrastructure. Additional servers were added. Mirrors were deployed to maintain uptime during attacks. Security updates were rolled out regularly. Unlike earlier markets, AlphaBay treated downtime as unacceptable. By 2016, the platform had surpassed all competitors. Some estimates suggest AlphaBay controlled more than 70% of the darknet market economy at its peak. It was no longer just a marketplace, it was a hub. Smaller markets depended on it. Prices across the darknet were influenced by AlphaBay listings. Vendor reputations were often built there first. This level of dominance came with confidence. Public messages from the administration became increasingly assertive. Occasionally, even dismissive. AlphaBay was portrayed not as a temporary service, but as a permanent institution. For many users, it felt inevitable. AlphaBay was simply where business was done. But history had already shown that scale attracts attention. The larger AlphaBay grew, the more visible its patterns became. Transaction volumes, server behavior, human mistakes. What appeared to be strength was also exposure. And while AlphaBay focused on growth and control, someone else was paying close attention, quietly documenting every move. For most AlphaBay users, DeSnake was not a person. He was a presence, a username that appeared in system announcements. A signature at the bottom of rule updates, an authority that was never questioned openly. Unlike other darknet administrators, DeSnake did not seek attention. He rarely gave interviews, he avoided public arguments. And he almost never revealed personal details. What he did reveal was control. His messages were precise, formal, and often cold. Rules were written like legal documents. Violations were punished without explanation. To vendors, DeSnake was predictable, and that made him powerful. He enforced escrow policies strictly, he intervened in disputes personally. And when necessary, he removed high-profile vendors without hesitation. This created an image of competence. In darknet forums, users compared AlphaBay's administration to a corporation rather than a criminal project, efficient, organized, unemotional, but small details hinted at something more complex. DeSnake often spoke about security as if it were personal. He emphasized operational discipline. He warned users not to trust anyone, including AlphaBay itself. At times, his tone shifted. In private messages leaked years later, DeSnake expressed paranoia, concerns about infiltration, suspicions of insiders, fear of betrayal. Despite this, AlphaBay's structure suggested centralization. Major decisions appeared to come from one account. Critical infrastructure was tightly controlled. There was no visible leadership team. This raised an uncomfortable question. Was DeSnake truly a single individual running the largest darknet market in history? Or was he a constructed identity, shared, protected, and deliberately opaque? Law enforcement would later claim they had an answer. According to official statements, DeSnake was Alexandre Cazes, a young Canadian living abroad, no criminal record, no public history suggesting he was capable of running a billion-dollar illegal enterprise. Friends described him as intelligent, private, and ambitious, but not reckless. Yet online, DeSnake appeared increasingly confident, at times even arrogant. He dismissed law enforcement takedowns of other markets. He mocked security failures elsewhere, and he publicly claimed that AlphaBay was designed to survive anything. This contradiction was never resolved. Was DeSnake overconfident, or protected by something he believed law enforcement could not see? By the time AlphaBay reached its peak, DeSnake was no longer just an administrator. He was a symbol of invulnerability. And symbols have a way of attracting exactly the kind of attention they cannot withstand. AlphaBay sold one product above all others: security. Every design choice, every announcement, every rule reinforced the same promise: anonymity without compromise. Users were warned to use encryption. Vendors were required to follow strict operational guidelines. Public discussions about real-world identities were forbidden. On the surface, AlphaBay appeared disciplined. But absolute control creates blind spots. As AlphaBay grew, so did the concentration of power at the top. Critical systems were managed centrally. Administrative access was limited to a small circle, possibly just one person. This efficiency came at a cost, a single point of failure. Behind the scenes, AlphaBay relied on traditional infrastructure more than users realized. Servers needed maintenance. Payments needed processing. Disputes required human judgment. Each task introduced risk. Law enforcement would later reveal that some AlphaBay servers were not as isolated as advertised. Certain administrative logins were reused. Some communications were not properly segmented. These were not dramatic mistakes, they were small compromises. But in complex systems, small compromises accumulate. Confidence also began to replace caution. DeSnake publicly criticized other market administrators for poor security. He presented AlphaBay as fundamentally different, more professional, more advanced. This attitude filtered down. Vendors became less careful, users reused accounts. Operational discipline softened. Even the choice to integrate Monero was framed as proof of superiority, not as a necessity, but as a statement. AlphaBay no longer felt temporary. It felt permanent. That belief shaped decisions. Updates were rolled out faster. Expansion continued, despite growing scrutiny. Warnings from users about law enforcement interest were dismissed. In retrospect, AlphaBay's greatest vulnerability was not technical. It was psychological, the assumption that past success guaranteed future safety. History shows that this assumption fails repeatedly, especially in environments built on secrecy. By the time AlphaBay reached its peak, its security was still strong. But its margin for error was gone, and someone, somewhere, had already noticed. While AlphaBay projected confidence, it was never invisible. Long before the market went offline, law enforcement agencies across multiple countries were quietly mapping its structure, this was not a single investigation. It was a coalition, the FBI, the Europol, and several national cybercrime units. Each agency saw only part of the picture, but together, patterns began to form. Investigators monitored transaction flows. They analyzed vendor behavior. They studied how AlphaBay reacted to pressure outages, arrests, and rival takedowns. Rather than rushing to shut it down, authorities chose patience. Previous darknet operations had shown that fast takedowns often destroyed valuable intelligence, users vanished, funds disappeared. Leads went cold. This time, the goal was different. They wanted the administrator. Undercover accounts were created, controlled purchases were made. Vendors were identified and quietly tracked. At the same time, technical teams focused on infrastructure. Hidden services still rely on real-world systems at some point, hosting providers, payment gateways. Human errors, even the most careful administrators have routines. Login times, writing patterns, operational habits. Slowly, these routines narrowed the search. Authorities would later state that a critical mistake linked AlphaBay administration to an email account, one that had been used years earlier, before AlphaBay existed. At the time, it seemed insignificant, but in long investigations, nothing is isolated. As AlphaBay expanded, pressure increased. Transaction volumes made surveillance easier. High-value vendors became liabilities. By 2017, law enforcement believed they had identified the person behind DeSnake. But they still waited, they monitored, they verified, they coordinated internationally. The goal was not just to shut down AlphaBay. It was to ensure it would not return. When the move finally came, it was sudden. But it had been years in the making. In early July 2017, something felt different. AlphaBay users began reporting intermittent outages. Mirrors failed to load, response times slowed. At first, few were concerned. Technical issues were common. Markets disappeared temporarily and returned. But this time, the silence stretched on. Then, without warning, AlphaBay went completely dark. No splash screen, no maintenance notice, no message from administration. For a platform built on constant communication and control, the absence was alarming. Within hours, darknet forums exploded with speculation. Some believed it was a denial-of-service attack, others suspected an exit scam. A few feared the worst. Escrow funds were frozen. Ongoing orders were left unresolved. Vendors lost access to inventory and reputations built over years. As hours turned into days, panic replaced denial. Shortly after AlphaBay vanished, law enforcement made their move public. In coordinated announcements, authorities confirmed that AlphaBay's infrastructure had been seized. Servers were under government control. The marketplace was permanently offline. This was not an accident, it was an operation. At the same time, police in Thailand arrested a man believed to be the administrator of AlphaBay. The timing was deliberate. By shutting down the platform first, investigators prevented evidence from being destroyed. Backups were captured, transaction records were preserved. For users, the takedown was absolute. There was no transition period. No warning to withdraw funds, no chance to adapt. AlphaBay's dominance had made it a single point of failure for much of the darknet economy. When it collapsed, everything connected to it felt the impact. Rival markets were overwhelmed. Overnight, scams increased, trust evaporated. Law enforcement described the takedown as one of the largest darknet operations ever conducted. But behind the public statements, a more significant development had already occurred. The person believed to control AlphaBay was now in custody. And for the first time, DeSnake had a real name. The arrest did not happen in a dark alley or a secret hideout. It happened in daylight. On July 5, 2017, Thai authorities detained Alexandre Cazes at his home in Bangkok. He was 26 years old. The scene contrasted sharply with the image of a shadowy darknet mastermind. Cazes lived openly. He drove luxury cars. He posted photos of expensive vacations. He appeared confident, almost careless. Law enforcement later revealed that his assets were extensive. Multiple high-end vehicles, large sums of cryptocurrency, real estate purchased under his own name. To investigators, this was confirmation. The administrator of the world's largest darknet market had not just made technical mistakes, he had made lifestyle ones. Cazes was taken to a Thai prison while extradition proceedings were prepared. He was never formally charged in court. Less than a week after his arrest, Alexandre Cazes was found dead in his cell. Authorities ruled the death a suicide by hanging. The announcement was brief. Details were limited. The case was considered closed almost immediately. For the public, the narrative was simple. The mastermind behind AlphaBay had been caught. Faced with life in prison, he took his own life. But within darknet communities, the reaction was very different. Questions emerged immediately. Why was a high-value international detainee left unsupervised? Why were security measures minimal? Why did the case end without testimony, trial, or interrogation records made public? Cazes had reportedly cooperated with authorities before his death. If true, that cooperation ended abruptly. For investigators, the outcome was frustrating. A central figure was gone. Potential information was lost forever. For AlphaBay users, the story felt incomplete. DeSnake had always seemed methodical, calculated, prepared. The idea that he would end his life without attempting to negotiate, delay, or manipulate the situation did not align with the persona they believed they knew. And with his death, a larger question remained unanswered. If Alexandre Cazes was DeSnake, why did so much about AlphaBay still not make sense? With Alexandre Cazes dead, the AlphaBay case should have been finished. Instead, it became more complicated. Almost immediately, inconsistencies began to surface. Official reports provided few details about Cazes' final hours. There was no public interrogation transcript, no courtroom testimony, no opportunity for cross-examination. For a case of this magnitude, the silence was unusual. Within darknet communities, speculation intensified. Some believed the wrong man had been arrested. Others argued that DeSnake was not a single individual, but a role, one that could survive the loss of one operator. There were also questions about timing. AlphaBay's servers had been seized quickly and efficiently. Yet certain administrative data appeared incomplete. Some wallets were empty, others were never publicly accounted for. This fueled theories of an exit plan. Could AlphaBay have been partially dismantled from the inside? Could assets have been moved before the arrest? Law enforcement insisted that AlphaBay was fully neutralized, but users noticed something else. Communication styles attributed to DeSnake continued to appear months later, not on AlphaBay, but on forums and encrypted channels. The writing was similar, the tone was familiar. The technical knowledge was intact. Whether these messages were genuine or imitations remains unclear. What is clear is that the identity of DeSnake became fragmented. Alexandre Cazes was dead, AlphaBay was gone. Yet the figure of the administrator persisted. This ambiguity transformed DeSnake from a suspect into a myth. A symbol of what the darknet promised, but could never guarantee true anonymity. In traditional criminal cases, closure comes from courtrooms and verdicts. In the darknet, closure is rare, evidence is hidden, narratives are controlled, truth competes with belief. The disappearance of AlphaBay's administrator did not answer questions. It created them, and in the absence of certainty, myths grow stronger than facts. When AlphaBay went offline, the impact was immediate. Millions of dollars in cryptocurrency were frozen in escrow. Vendors lost not only their income, but their reputations, painstakingly built over years. Some accounts held life savings. Others contained illicit profits that could never be recovered. The darknet economy shuddered. Rival markets tried to absorb the displaced users. Some collapsed under the sudden influx. Others became targets for scams. Trust, once the foundation of these marketplaces, eroded overnight. AlphaBay's disappearance also created opportunities. Copycat markets emerged almost immediately, promising stronger security, faster payouts, and anonymity guaranteed. Yet many were short-lived, collapsing under law enforcement scrutiny or exit scams. Users learned a harsh lesson: no system is invulnerable. For law enforcement, the takedown was a success. Transaction logs, vendor identities, and server data provided intelligence on ongoing criminal networks. But for the community that thrived in these hidden spaces, AlphaBay was more than a marketplace. It was a hub, a central artery in the darknet's veins. Its absence left a vacuum, chaos and fear. Even years later, the impact is visible. The collapse of AlphaBay reshaped the darknet ecosystem. Smaller markets adapted, users became more cautious. Cryptocurrency wallets became more sophisticated. And yet, one question remained: could such a market ever truly disappear? AlphaBay had left its mark. A billion-dollar empire vanished, but its lessons persisted. The story of the market, its users, and the elusive administrator became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power, wealth, and secrecy do not guarantee safety. Even after AlphaBay was dismantled, whispers persisted. Was this the end of the marketplace, or just a pause? Darknet users noticed patterns. Domain names similar to AlphaBay appeared. New markets adopted its branding. Some even claimed to be direct successors, promising to pick up where AlphaBay left off. Copycats and imitators flourished. The mythology of AlphaBay grew alongside them. It was no longer just a platform, it had become a legend. For law enforcement, these offshoots were a reminder. Takedowns do not erase demand, they merely displace it. Users quickly migrate to other marketplaces, often more secretive, sometimes more dangerous. Yet the fascination with AlphaBay is not just about money or drugs. It is about the idea of invincibility, an online empire controlled by a single, enigmatic administrator who vanished without a trace. The story persists because it taps into something fundamental, the allure of the unseen and untouchable. Even today, security researchers, journalists, and former users study AlphaBay. They dissect server logs, forum messages, and transaction patterns. They try to understand what made it successful and what made it vulnerable. And the question remains, could a platform like AlphaBay ever truly be eliminated? History suggests not. Markets rise and fall, administrators disappear, but the demand remains. The darknet evolves, and somewhere, new versions of the marketplace will emerge, learning from the past, adapting to new technologies, and keeping the legend alive. AlphaBay may be gone, but its shadow still looms over the hidden corners of the internet. AlphaBay's story is more than the rise and fall of a darknet marketplace. It is a story about power. How a single administrator could build an empire worth billions in secrecy. How control and ambition can create both dominance and vulnerability. It is a story about greed, the pursuit of wealth, risk, and influence in an environment with few rules, except those you create yourself. For vendors and users alike, AlphaBay was both opportunity and temptation. And it is a story about digital illusions. Anonymity, security, and permanence are fragile concepts online. Even the most sophisticated systems can collapse, leaving unanswered questions and chaos in their wake. The disappearance of DeSnake, Alexandre Cazes, leaves us with a haunting truth. We may never fully understand the inner workings of these markets. The man, the myth, the administrator, he is gone. Yet his influence remains. AlphaBay is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that the digital world, while vast and complex, mirrors the real one, where ambition meets vulnerability, and where secrecy can be both shield and trap. In the end, the legend of AlphaBay endures, not because it was invincible, but because it exposed the fragile balance between trust, power, and human ambition. And in the shadowy corners of the internet, that balance continues to shape every transaction, every market, and every mystery yet to unfold.